This is a spider crab. It lives deep at the bottom of the ocean where there's no light, and it has got a single enemy. It doesn't need to run away from anything because it can't move. This poor guy has been stuck in this position for his entire life. And he's not alone. There are other crabs like him who are frozen in similar positions. They don't seem to mind at all. Some scientists believe these crabs went blind because they didn't need their eyesight to survive. Instead, they rely on their sense of touch. But why did they lose their mobility? See, when these animals first evolved about 240 million years ago, they lived in the shallows where it was easy to find food. They didn't have to do much work to get nutrients. But around 20 million years later, something changed. The planet began warming up, which caused sea levels to rise and flooded the coastal plains. The shallow waters where our ancestors lived became deeper and darker, and the amount of food decreased. Our ancestors had to adapt if they were going to survive. Some crabs retreated into caves, while others migrated further out to sea. Over millions of years, they evolved to become active predators instead of scavengers. Their bodies grew larger, their legs became stronger, and they developed bigger brains to help them hunt. Unfortunately, those adaptations came with drawbacks. Their new body shape made it hard for them to fit into small spaces like the cracks and crevices in the caves. So many crabs stayed in the open ocean rather than venturing back into the caves. As a result, their eyesight evolved to help them navigate the dark depths. However, some stubborn crabs still preferred the safety of the caves to the dangers of the open ocean. They hung out in groups and used their collective senses to keep watch for danger. They also started communicating with each other using chemical signals. This allowed them to share information about potential threats, helping everyone in the group stay safe. It just so happened that the crabs we saw at the beginning of the video were the ones who chose to live in caves. Over the eons, they gradually lost their eyesight and mobility, but gained a powerful sense of touch. This adaptation may have originally helped them navigate their cave homes, but it also makes them vulnerable to a sneaky predator. This is a fish that only has one eye, and it hangs out in places you wouldn't expect to see a fish, like caves, sewers, and wells. And it's not the only animal that prefers to live underground. In fact, more than 20,000 species have been found living in caves. These animals are known as stygobites, and they're generally divided into two categories. The first category consists of animals that spend part of their lives above ground and then retreat to the caves when they re-threatened, like salamanders and beetles. The second category includes animals that were born and raised underground. The fish we mentioned earlier belongs to this group. It's called the Mexican tetra, and it's so strange that some scientists think it could be the missing link between fish that live in caves and those that come from the surface. The thing is, we're not sure how the Mexican tetra ended up in these isolated bodies of water. Perhaps they were introduced by humans, or maybe they swam there on their own. If that's the case though, why would they abandon the outside world? Well, it turns out that the Mexican tetra benefits from living in caves. By hanging out in sewers and wells, they avoid daytime predators like herons and egrets. Plus, their subterranean lairs are full of tasty treats, like insects and worms. And unlike their relatives that live in lakes and rivers, they aren't hunted by fish or frogs. They've also lost their color and most of their body hair, which makes it easier for them to blend in with the cave environment. It also makes them less appealing to predators that might occasionally stumble upon them. Scientists think losing their eyesight was another advantage. After all, there's no use for it when you're hanging out in the dark. But what about their brains? Since vision is one of the most important senses for many animals, it should make sense that cave animals have smaller brains than their surface-dwelling relatives, right? Well, not necessarily. A study published in 2020 analyzed the brains of several cave-dwelling animals, including fish like the Mexican tetra. What the researchers found was that the animals with the largest relative brain sizes were also the ones that exhibited the most complex behaviors. The Mexican tetra had a larger brain size than the surface-dwelling fish it's related to. Other animals that showed this trend included the Cuban cave cricket and the Borneo cavefish. So having a larger brain might actually be beneficial for cave animals. After all, it helps them compensate for their lack of eyesight. Speaking of brains, this next animal has the smallest brain of any mammal. It's called a bumblebee bat, and its brain weighs less than a gram. For comparison, a human brain weighs about 1,300 grams, but despite its tiny brain, the bumblebee bat can fly backwards, which is something not even the smartest birds can do. It can also echolocate, which means it uses sound waves to figure out where objects are in space. Just like other bats, the bumblebee bat relies on echolocation because it's almost completely blind. You see, cave-dwelling animals tend to evolve smaller eyes and simpler brains, which probably isn't a good thing for intelligence, but they gain a heightened sense of hearing. So perhaps it's not too surprising that the bumblebee bat lives in caves. It avoids daytime predators and can easily find tasty insects to eat. But did you know that bumblebee bats don't eat solid food? These guys are specialized insectivores, which means they only eat insects that are soft enough to be turned into a liquid. They basically drink their food, and they're not the only ones. Almost all cave animals are specialized insectivores. Maybe this diet is one reason why so many cave animals have big brains. That way they can figure out how to get their insect prey into liquid form. But why do so many cave animals prefer this weird diet? Well, it turns out that the deeper you go into a cave, the fewer large animals you'll find. That's because there's not much food down there. Most caves are unlike the ocean floor where there's an abundance of dead stuff falling from above. No, in most caves, the only things that decompose are the animals that live there. And if there aren't any large animals, then there isn't much to break down. Therefore, cave ecosystems are mostly made up of small invertebrates like beetles and spiders. None of them have thick shells or tough armor that's difficult to chew through. Bumblebee bats and other cave-dwelling animals have evolved to eat these small invertebrates. Liquidizing their food might make it easier to digest too. Okay, now let's look at another animal with a tiny brain. This guy is a beetle that lives in caves in Thailand and Vietnam. It's about half an inch long and has huge jaws that it uses to capture its prey. The thing is, the beetle isn't a predator. Instead, it's a scavenger that eats dead insects and decomposing wood. Like many other cave dwellers, it's completely blind. And it turns out that blind beetles tend to have smaller brains than those with eyesight. Scientists think that's because they don't need to use as much energy to process visual input. But the big-headed beetle has a bigger brain than its relatives that live in the sunlight. It needs that extra processing power to solve puzzles. Scientists have conducted several experiments to test the intelligence of these beetles. In one experiment, they placed a beetle in a tube with two chambers separated by a barrier. One chamber had a piece of food in it while the other one was empty. At first, the beetle could only access the empty chamber. But after some time, it figured out how to move the barrier and get to the food. The big-headed beetle is one of the few animals that can solve this type of puzzle, and it does so without using its eyes. It seems like having a larger brain helps make up for the lack of vision. But not all cave-dwelling animals have oversized brains. Take the gray whiptail, for example. This lizard lives in underground burrows that it digs itself. And even though it's blind, it has a smaller brain than its surface-dwelling relatives. Having a smaller brain probably helps it save energy, since it spends most of its time hiding in its burrow. But there are other animals that have both tiny brains and oversized eyes. That might seem counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you consider that these animals use their sense of touch to navigate. This is a fish that has huge eyes and a tiny brain. Its ancestors were small fish that lived in caves near hot springs. They preferred warmer temperatures, so they adapted to thrive in thermal waters. And even though they don't live in caves anymore, they kept their tiny brains. Interestingly, these fish have bigger brains than some of their relatives that live in caves. But their eyes are also larger. And that's probably because they're more closely related to fish that live in open water. Not only do they have bigger eyes, but they can also see ultraviolet light, and they use this ability to recognize their own reflections. Yeah, seriously, scientists have tested this. They marked these fish with a dot and then showed them their reflection. The fish spent more time looking at the reflection than the control group. Basically, they recognized that the dotted fish in the mirror was themselves. Now, these are just a few of the strangest creatures that have adapted to live in caves. Some of them have brains that are larger or smaller than their relatives. Others have eyes or no eyes at all. These animals show us that there are many ways to be an intelligent creature. Thanks for watching.